At this time, I would like to give you something to think about. A while back, I was reading about an expert on the subject of time management. One day, this expert was speaking to a group of business students and, to drive home a point, used an illustration I'm sure those students will never forget. And after I share it with you, I bet you'll never forget it either. As the man stood in front of the group of high-powered overachievers, he said, "Okay, time for a quiz." Then he pulled out a 1-gallon, wide-mouthed mason jar and set it on the table in front of him. Then he produced about a dozen fist-sized rocks and carefully placed them one at a time into the jar. Now, when the jar was filled to the top and no more rocks would fit inside, he asked, "Is the jar full?" Everyone in the class said, "Yes." Then he said, "Really?" He reached under the table and pulled out a bucket of gravel. Then he dumped some of the gravel in and shook the jar, causing the pieces of the gravel to work themselves down into the spaces between the big rocks. Then he smiled and asked the group one more time, "Is the jar full?" By this time, the class was on to him. "Probably not," one of them answered. "Good," he replied. And he reached under the table and brought out a bucket of sand. And he started dumping the sand in, and it went into all the spaces left between the rocks and the gravel. And once more he asked the question, "Is the jar full?" "No," the class shouted. Once again he said, "Good." Then he grabbed a pitcher of water and began to pour it in until the jar was filled to the brim. Then he looked at the class and asked, "What is the point of this illustration?" One eager beaver raised his hand and said, "The point is, no matter how full your schedule is, if you really try hard, you can always fit some more things into it." "No," the speaker replied, "that's not the point. The truth this illustration teaches us is this: if you don't get the big rocks in first, you'll never get them in at all." Think about that. Think how many times in our lives, especially in our lives here at school, that we have so many things that press on us that we feel like we never get to the most important things because all of the minor things that are getting in our way. I'd like to illustrate this story for you because I believe that this story is so meaningful and so powerful that I believe that here in this district, as we approach our task of being able to educate the students of this district, that the concept of what are the big rocks that need to go into the jar first is crucial to us. I would like to give you my idea as to what the 5 big rocks are that we need to focus on and make absolutely sure that we get these rocks in, that we do these things first, because if we do, then everything else will fall in place. But if we ignore these big rocks, then we will find that we will have majored in minors when we look back on what we have done. So the first big rock that I want to talk to you about is the mission of our district. And I have to illustrate the mission of a statue that I have in my office. It was given to me over 20 years ago by a friend. And it's a little statue of a professor or a teacher with a little child. And the professor is intently engaged with the child. And you may not be able to see the look that's on this child's face from where you sit, but the child is looking up in adoration at the professor. The concept here is of a teacher and a child. The mission of the Duncanville ISD is to provide each individual student with the necessary skills to achieve lifelong success and contribute to a global society. A teacher to a student. That's what it's all about. You know, all we do in this district should focus on this mission. Let's think for a moment about the power of the phrase, each individual student. It's easy for us to lose the individual student in the sea of faces that we see on a daily basis. But we must keep focus on each child and give the quality education to every child that we would want given to our own. So the first big rock that we're going to place in the jar is the mission of the district, to focus on each individual student. The second big rock that we're going to place into the jar has to do with the guiding principles of our district, the bedrock expectations of our district that all employees are expected to follow at all times. To illustrate the concept of the guiding principles, I have a compass that was given to me by the board of directors this past Christmas, and it's a very meaningful gift. A compass helps keep us on course. It helps keep us on the right path. We can judge if we're getting off of where we should be going very easily by looking at our compass. And the compass that we have in this district is our guiding principles. I'm going to go ahead and put the compass in so I can continue with it, talking about what the guiding principles are. The first guiding principle that I would like to talk to you about today is the fact that in Duncanville ISD, we expect all employees at all times to respect the dignity and worth of each individual person, regardless of the age, sex, religion, race, ethnicity, or economic level of the individual, and neither engage in nor tolerate prejudiced behaviors. I want to tell you a true story that happened this past year to illustrate a proper living out of this a particular principle. One of the principals of our schools was telling me that late during the school year, one day a mother walked in to the office to enroll her child. And it was obvious from looking at the mother and the child that they were a poor economic level. The mother walked up to the counter and started to talk in very loud terms about how she needed to get her son enrolled in the school, but that he'd been in trouble and that he couldn't learn very much, and he got thrown out of the last school that he was in, and she wanted somebody in this school to do something to help her kid. Well, it just so happened to be that there were 3 or 4 teachers in the office that were watching this, and you can just imagine their thoughts when they saw this. And let's be honest, the teachers knew that one of them was going to end up with a student. And don't you just imagine the teachers just started finding ways to hide so the principal wouldn't look to them to put this child in their classroom? But that's not what happened. What happened was one of the teachers walked over to that mother, to the principal, and to that little child. Let's call him Johnny. And she bent down, she put her arm around Johnny, and she looked up at the principal and said, "Can I have Johnny in my room? I bet Johnny will be a great asset to our room, and I would really like to have Johnny. Johnny, would you mind being in my room? Can I have you and teach you this year?" Well, the principal said she started crying, the mother started crying, and everyone in that office started crying. And that little boy then went to that teacher's classroom. And a couple of weeks later, the principal went into that classroom, saw that little boy, and Johnny looked up at her and said, "I like this school." Why did that happen? Why did that positive story happen? It happened because the teacher acted out of her own initiative and truly demonstrated respect for the dignity and worth of every kid, regardless of the circumstances in which that child found himself. So I want you to keep that story in mind as we think about this first principle, that is to respect the dignity and worth of each person in our district. We live in a diverse society. The Duncanville ISD is a diverse district. We cannot have any tolerance of prejudiced or biased behaviors in this district. So I want you to remember that as we go forth into this next year. The second guiding principle that is represented by the compass is that we make decisions that are consistent with the district's mission, goals, and objectives, and are that in the best interest of all students. Now, each employee, regardless of the job that you do, needs to pursue this mission. We all need to be working together toward this mission, and we need to make our decisions based upon, will this decision help us move toward teaching each student, or will it not? Let's keep that in mind as one of the guiding principles. The third one is to act in a way that conveys high expectations for performance for all students and employees. If there's one piece of research that is absolutely beyond refute, it's the research that's been done over the last 50 to 75 years about the power of expectations. Time after time after time, it has been repeated, and time after time, the outcome has always been the same. You give a class of students to a teacher, tell the teacher that these are high-performing students, and you've got to push them, and those students will perform. You give a class to a teacher and say these are low-performing students, and you won't expect much of them, then they're not going to perform. But the truth of the matter is, these two groups are exactly the same. The only real difference is the expectation that the teacher has. We cannot slip into having low expectations for students because of their economic, race, ethnic, or whatever other circumstances that they're in. Every child should be held to a high expectation of what we expect of them because they are worth our efforts in that regard. The fourth principle is to perform his or her job in a manner that supports the fundamental purpose of all jobs in the district, and that is teaching students. I'd like to illustrate this point by telling you a story, a true story. A few years ago, the authors of Built to Last were surveying different people in different businesses about how they became successful companies. And so what they did is they went to McDonald's and they walked into the chief financial officer of McDonald's office and they said, "What is your job?" And he looked at them and said, "My job is selling hamburgers." They said, no, wait a minute. No, what's your job? What's your job? He said, "My job is selling hamburgers." Now, if you ask me what my function is I'm the chief financial officer of this company. But my job is selling hamburgers. So I'd like to extend that to this school district. Regardless if you're a custodian, a bus driver, food services, a secretary, an aide, a principal, a teacher, it makes no difference what level you are in this organization. Your job is teaching students. Now, you may have a different function, but your job is still the same. And we need to perform our job understanding the power that you have in your job, because you name one job in this district that can't be done, you name one job in this district that we could eliminate and we could still function. Well, there's not. Do without custodians? No way. Do without secretaries? Impossible. Every one of those jobs contributes, and we just need to understand what we're contributing to, and that is to the teaching of every student in this district. The next expectation that we have is to know who our customers are, and then meet or exceed their expectations, and ensure customer-friendly actions and procedures. Each one of you can give me an example, I bet, of very good customer service that you've had. At the same time, I bet each one of you can give me an example of poor customer satisfaction and customer service. And those are the ones that stick in our minds. So let's think about that for a moment. That's also true with our public. What they remember most vividly are those times when they haven't had good customer service. So we need to eliminate those as many times as we can and focus on giving good, positive customer service, just like you would want to have good customer service. For teachers specifically, parents are your customers because they control whether or not their child comes here or not. They control the resource. So we need to treat them with respect as one who has a choice and engage them as a partner. Specifically, every phone in this school district, every room in this school district has a telephone. And so I believe teachers need to use that telephone to call parents. You have voicemail where you can leave messages for parents, or they can leave messages for you. So I'd like to encourage you to be very parent-friendly in all that we do, and keep parents informed. Let there be no surprises. Let them know how their children are doing. Number 6, behave in a moral, ethical, and legal manner. Hopefully, this one is self-explanatory. We have laws of the land, and we have different mores and customs in our land that show us forth as role models. And you know and I know that one of the most damaging things that can happen to a school, or to schools in general, is when one person in the school business is on the front page of the paper or on the evening news because they have violated a moral, ethical, or legal principle. Let's remember the responsibility, the great responsibility we have to be role models to our children in our schools and to operate in a moral, legal, and ethical manner. Next, we need to ensure that our work contributes to a positive, cohesive team with high commitments for the goals of this district. Teamwork is so vital. There's a synergy that develops when people are working together for a common cause that transcends anything that any one individual or any group of individuals separately by themselves can do. And I want to make sure that everyone understands very clearly that this principle is very dear to me, and that each one of us needs to contribute to a positive teamwork within this district. And behaviors that do not contribute to a positive teamwork need to be removed. What we need to do is contribute to positive teamwork and support for each other. Remove the barriers and the walls that separate us and unite us and work together for the common good of the children of this district. Finally, The last guiding principle that I would like to mention comes from Stephen Covey, and that is to seek first to understand, then seek to be understood. You can each put yourself in a time when you have had something heavy on your heart that you needed to express, and a person gave a listening ear, and how much it meant to you. You probably also can remember times when you needed to express something that was really bothering you, and the person was more interested in his or her own problems or did not want to listen, or gave you just a cursory audience. Each of these situations need to be very meaningful to us. And let's practice, you with your friends with you, with parents, with students. Let's practice this concept. Let's understand what the other person has to say first. Then I believe they're going to be much more ready to listen to what you have to say and to what I have to say. So those are our guiding principles. Represented by the compass, we place the mission and the guiding principles into the jar, and the jar is beginning to fill up. What's next? The next big rock that we need to place in has to do with technology, the use of technology. I have represented a cable. I'd like for you to think for a moment about the power this cable represents, to be able to link the classroom, the teacher, the student, the school, to the world, to link people together, to link knowledge in such great quantities that we cannot even imagine, down to each individual classroom. This cable represents the power of technology, and we must harness that power. The expectation of this district is that each person that works within this district will, as is appropriate on the job in which she or he works, use technology. For teachers, the focus is very clear. We must integrate technology into the classroom. It must be transparent. It must not be seen as something else that we have to do. It's got to be seen as clearly a transparent tool that helps us to deliver information to the students and for students to learn themselves. Now, in this district, we've already provided each teacher a laptop computer. In addition to that, teachers have the opportunity to go through Duncanville University, which makes sure that all of our teachers have a base level learning as far as technology is concerned. In the future, we're going to have more training opportunities so that we can have teachers fully trained to be the best trained teachers in the state of Texas, is how to use technology as a vehicle for moving students forward. Together, technology can be a springboard that takes us to that next level. So I want you to understand that one of the big rocks that we need to put into this jar is the fact that we individually use technology the way that it needs to be used within the job that we hold, especially that of a classroom teacher. The next big rock that I would like for us to consider that needs to be placed into the jar that represents the capacity of the district is that of good, safe schools, good discipline. You know, no school can achieve its mission without a safe, orderly environment and without good school discipline. At the teacher level, where the teachers meet students, there are several factors that need to be considered. And I've chosen to represent this big rock by these three items that are taken together. First, we have a heart. This heart represents the concept of relationships, and that we must lead with a heart in what we do with our students. It's unquestionable that if we have a positive relationship with someone, what they say to us and what they ask of us will mean much more than if we do not have a positive relationship with them. The second issue is that of doing what we do with students with respect, maintaining their dignity, understanding that what we're trying to do is to grow and to develop them. And I think that Bob Alpert, our head coach, explains this very well. When he talks to his coaches about disciplining the students on his team, he says, discipline develops respect, but harassment breeds contempt. What within this phrase has within it the concept of dealing with the dignity of the student, this book, Discipline with Dignity, that we understand that our mission is to grow that student and to help that student to become all that she or he can be. Now, they are not allowed to misbehave and to disrupt, but it's the way that we approach is the concept of leading with a heart and discipline with dignity. The third illustration that I have is the code of conduct for the district. Beyond a doubt, You cannot have an orderly classroom. We cannot have a safe school without a good, strong code of conduct, and ours is. We've revised it. We've worked on it. We believe that we have a code of conduct that will meet the needs of teachers and meet the needs of principals. Now, the code of conduct is strong in its wording, but it's worthless unless it's enforced. And every teacher, every administrator, every day needs to enforce the code of conduct so that we can have a consistent environment with our students. I'm going to place these three items into our jar so I can continue with discussing of this issue, because there's a few more points that I'd like to make about this big rock, because it is so important. There's a few points I want to emphasize are these. Number one, know the code of conduct. Your principals are going to go over the code with you. Either they already have during the staff development period or they will before the school starts. So be sure that you understand what the rules and the regulations are within the code. Number two, specifically, I want you to be sure and know and enforce the district uniform code of dress. We changed our dress code this year because of input that we received from teachers that said we need something more standardized, we need something that's easier to enforce, we need something that will remove disruptions from our classroom. We got input from teachers and from administrators, and we have a code that I believe will do that. You know, some of you may really think the code is great. Some of you may disagree with it. But you know, at this point in time right now, all of us have got to work together to support it. Whether you agree with it or not, it's not an option, because it is the district policy and it is the means that we're going to use to help you to provide a safe, orderly learning environment. The next thing that I'd like to clarify to you is the fact that I believe each of you in the classroom need to be sure that you make sure the students understand your personal expectations in your classroom. Naturally, teachers vary in what they expect in certain levels within the classroom. Make sure that your students understand what is acceptable and what is not for you in your classroom. Now, on that issue, I'd like to talk about another point for just a moment, and that's the issue of disruptive students. I've heard a lot of concern expressed over the years about the fact that teachers feel like that they have students in their classroom that are continually disrupting, and they still stay in the classroom, and they feel powerless as to what to do about that. What I'm about to say in the next moment is extremely important, and I'd like for you to listen very carefully to what I'm saying. You can, and you should, remove from your class those students who continually disrupt your classroom. Now, there's a way to do that, and there's a proper means to do that, and I want to explain that to you very clearly. First of all, you need to take personal responsibility for correcting the behaviors and to intervening in your classroom with something that will try to change the behavior of that student. Secondly, you need to make sure that you engage the parents, that you bring them into the loop as well. Third, you need to refer these students to the counselor if necessary and to the administration if necessary. Send them to the principal's office is the common way of thinking about this for the administrator's assistance. Then, however, if you have taken reasonable and prudent steps in your classroom, if you have contacted the parents and engaged them, if you've engaged the assistance of counselors and administrators as you should have, and you've taken a reasonable approach, and over a reasonable period of time, then you can remove that student from your school. This year I've asked that we develop a special form, so there's absolutely no doubt. And it's called formal teacher removal. And if a student gets to that point, and you've met the reasonable expectations of what you should have done to that point in time, you can fill out this form, and the student will be removed from your class, and the only way that he will be returned to your class is if you agree or if the placement review committee on the campus determines that the best and only placement for that student is to go back into your classroom. Now remember this too, that the placement review committee for a special education student is the ARD committee. But I want you to be sure and know that we have this process. It's based upon state law. We have a special form this year. We're going to put it on a standardized color so when the principal sees it, she or he knows automatically what we're dealing with, and I want you to understand clearly what we need to do on this issue. Now finally, I want you to hear this too. In the future, if I hear from you about the fact that you have a disruptive student in your school, in your classroom that is continually disrupting you, then I want to ask you why. Because you have the tools, you have the system, you have the power to make one of two things happen, either for the student to change or else that you remove the student from the classroom. Now let's close this topic by saying this. The power of this teacher removal is not a license. It's certainly not a license to discriminate. It's certainly not a license to not to do your job. But what it is a tool to help you, if used prudently and non-discriminatingly, to help you to do your job in the way that it should be so that your classroom is free from continual disruption. So I don't want there to be any question in anyone's mind that that power is there in your hands. The principals know it. It is my expectation that we follow through on this. It is also my expectation that you take reasonable and prudent efforts to be able to do what is necessary within the classroom for that child prior to removal. So enough on that, because I think I made my point very clear, and I hope that you understand what we're saying here. I'd like to move to the last big rock. The last big rock is what I call Learning for All. And I stole the name from Dr. Larry Lazat's book, Learning for All. Last year, each principal was given a copy of this book, and if you remember, each teacher was given a copy of this book. And the administrator studied it, and I asked that the administrator study this book with the teachers. Within this book, the philosophy of Learning for All comes forth in very clear terms. And it explains the importance and the how to do it. Beyond that, we have developed in this district in pursuit of Learning for All as a process, as a means to attain Learning for All, which I will place in the jar now. We have developed the Duncanville instructional model. Now, the Duncanville instructional model is based upon the book Learning for All, but it's also based upon proven success in other schools, much like ours. Things that other teachers have done with students in an environment much like ours that have raised the bar for success. Now, we've taken all this information and we fine-tuned it, we've boiled it down to what we want and what we think will work, and it's known as the Duncanville instructional model. Now, let me be very clear about this point. Those schools and those teachers that have truly used this model over the past 2 years have had phenomenal success. It's unquestionable that this model works. Now, this past July, teachers from each of the schools, along with the principals, went through a 5-day, very extensive study of the Duncanville instructional model. So those teachers on each campus can go back and make sure that every teacher understands the model and how to use it so that we can all get high results.